So we're going to move right on to our next guest speaker, who's Greg Guibert. Many of you may know Greg or know the name. He, speaking of the Natural Hazard Center, served as the project manager, or the manager of the Hazard Center for a number of years. We were talking before the session. It seems like a lifetime ago, but Greg, of course, certainly has done a lot of good work for the Hazard Center and subsequently for NCAR, and now is recently been appointed as Boulder, Colorado's first Chief Resilience Officer, CRO. Prior to his appointment in that position, Greg worked at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, as a risk and development project specialist, developing and managing innovative projects that address complex social and environmental challenges at the intersection of science, policy, and practice. His projects included such diverse areas as translating climate science for decision support, food systems and security under changing climates, and cyber infrastructure for observing networks. As a senior associate with the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, he worked on the Rockefeller Foundation-funded Asian Cities Climate Change Resilient Network to develop analytical frameworks and tools for building urban resilience to climate change and its impact to 10 cities across the South and Southeast Asia. So with that, Greg Guibert.
Well, thanks, Darren. I appreciate that. And it's, I have to say, Ariette, I'm so jealous of the regional work that's being done. I talked to my colleagues in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, and it's wonderful to have that network. And in Colorado, we're developing that network in a slightly different way, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm Greg Guibert. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer. It's hard to know how to structure these presentations. There's a lot of interest and a lot of curiosity around this program. And so I'm going to touch on a bunch of different things, nothing in terrible depth. I'll give you a sense of where we are and the issues that are rising to our priority levels. But I'm more than happy to answer any of the questions you have. It's much easier to sort of respond to your interests than sort of assume that I understand what you're interested in. So Darren gave a very nice introduction to my background. I start with this, a little bit about me. It's not because I have a bloated ego, it's because you can come to this field from so many different perspectives, and your background really does change your perspective on how you view resilience, which is an amorphous kind of evolving concept. So as Darren mentioned, I was the manager for the Natural Hazard Center, so I had some grounding in natural hazards and disaster risk reduction. I moved on to the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I did a lot of work in the climate change and climate adaptation fields. And I want to say one or two words about the Asian Cities Climate Resilience Network. It's a real mouthful. It's really the precursor to the 100 Resilient Cities program. It was a fairly substantial investment in 10 medium-sized, rapidly developing Asian countries. And if you think we don't know what we're talking about in terms of resilience right now, imagine where we were 7 years ago when we were first using that term. It was confusing in multiple languages. It's confusing now in multiple languages, but there was really simply nothing available. And so a lot of the tools and a lot of the concepts that go into the framework, and actually, in fact, to the Chief Resilience Officer position, that was one of the big lessons learned of having a champion within the government to make these things work, comes from that program. You don't actually hear a lot about the ACER program, and I think, I didn't want to put words in Rockefeller's mouth, but I think from their perspective, when you think about a donor looking for some movement in the global field, that program didn't get the sort of splash they're looking for. And so with the 100th anniversary of the foundation, they launched this new initiative, 100 Resilient Cities, and Boulder's been fortunate enough to be selected in the first round. And so again, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing. Beyond a little bit of the context of who I am and my perspective, I want to tell you a little bit about Boulder. Many of you know it, probably in some respects better than I do. I've been a resident for 12 years. It's a prosperous, small, or at least has a perception of being a prosperous small town of about 100,000 people, highly educated population, in some cases too educated. It has a diverse economic base with 2 universities, one being the only Buddhist-inspired university in the country. Several federal research labs. It's really known for its tech startup community, a lot of venture capital investment. And this was unknown to me before I took over this position, or took on this position. It's considered the Silicon Valley for the natural and organic food market, which is really interesting. It creates an interesting set of dynamics. It's consistently rated one of the best places in the United States to live, work, or play. I can attest to that. It is a wonderful place. If you haven't been to Boulder, it's just down the road. I'm going to play tour guide, but it's a wonderful place. It's internationally known for its progressive land use planning, its open space preservation, dual-use greenways and floodways, and I'll come back to that. That has a really interesting story from our 2013 flood. It's an arid climate, and of course you get a sense of the topography, the steep elevation gradient. This has obviously quite a lot to do with our flood risk. You really can't talk about resilience in Boulder without talking about the 2013 flood, so I'll go over a couple of just really high-level highlight type of stats. Give you some context, but really our resilience work is well beyond natural disasters. And in fact, for the most part, I don't actually deal with floods, fires, or any of the sort of more standard type of things. We're really trying to diversify our understanding of resilience into more economic and social areas. So we had 8 days of rain, nearly the entire annual average of 18 inches all at once. Some people consider it a 1,000-year precipitation event, but only a 100-year flood event. This really depends on who you ask and which watershed you're looking at. In the Boulder Creek watershed, this is absolutely not the case. And we just need to be really clear about that. We had a 25-year flood event on Boulder Creek. Many of the other smaller watersheds that activated and we weren't planning for did reach the 100 level event. It was not a 1,000-year precipitation event on Boulder Creek, but it was as you moved further north. And that's just the way that the storm set up and the gradient. Access to the mountain communities, this was our biggest vulnerability. Access to the mountain communities was severed along 6 of the 7 major canyons. For people who aren't familiar with the West and who aren't familiar with the topography here, the canyons up are the transportation networks. They are the infrastructure pipelines. When those go, it all goes. And so there was just a real isolation of the communities to the west, and certainly isolation and islanding of communities all the way along the Front Range. We had $300 million in private property damage, $27 million in municipal property damage. Only $14 million was reimbursable by FEMA or other sources. These numbers are evolving. It's hard to say this, but we're actually still kind of in our disaster. It's continuing. We had a lot of rain in May, which re-exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities. We had temporary solutions. We go up these canyons. These are temporary roads. I don't know really what it takes to make it a permanent road, but they are washing out in some places. For those of you who have been coming to the Hazard Center for many, many years, you will have heard quite a lot about Guibert White and his work on the Boulder Creek and the many, many decades now of planning that have gone on in the city. But this was not a flash flood. It was a lot of rain. It was a riverine flood. It was fast flowing because of the topography, but it was not a flash flood. It was not the flood we've been preparing for, certainly not in Boulder. There was hardly any damage in downtown. Only one business was damaged. So a couple of lessons that we learned from the flood, which are kind of influencing where we go from here. FEMA has, and this is best practice, right? Greenways and floodways where there's no development. Boulder has been a real pioneer in this area. But I think it's a little shock to everyone that green infrastructure, as vital as it is not reimbursable. And it's not as if it's free. It's not just a lawn. It's a dual or tri-use way. And so I think we're having some really interesting conversations with FEMA now about what that could begin to look like in other communities that might be affected. A new threat, just starting to wrap our mind around, groundwater intrusion was completely unexpected. Over 50% of the housing, the house level flooding was through groundwater intrusion and sewer backups. So we're just starting to grapple with what that looks like. There's no map of this. There is hardly any programs in place to sort of mitigate that. The open space boundary, one of our chief attributes, one of the things that makes Boulder a unique and special community, has been in place for the better part of 30 years. This is really the first time I think we're at a real inflection point here where we're starting to recognize that actually increases some vulnerabilities in terms of the housing affordability issue, the ability to house professional first responders within the municipal boundary, and then this sort of 10-mile radius that it takes for mutual aid, and if you don't have those people in town, it really extends the risk and vulnerability. Similarly, we now only have one major hospital, which is located in the heart of the floodplain. So all of our beds, our ER beds, are at high risk now, and I don't know that that was ever considered. We saw quite a lot of the reinforcement of core principles: know your neighbor, have a plan, and understand your risk. Somewhat shockingly, I think, although I think people who are in this field know this happens routinely, is that the shadow effect of this event has been very, very short. And we're really kind of grappling with how to mobilize the community around ideas of risk and understanding that we have these really difficult challenges ahead of us. So most of you, I think, were here for Brian's talk yesterday. I thought it was excellent. There's a great couple of case studies in there. I'm going to go through a couple of our pieces. Again, happy to answer questions. It's really hard to know what resonates with what group. But the presentation she gave yesterday is very stylized. It's really great that they're at the mothership and they've got these frameworks and these sort of loose processes. But anybody who works in this field knows that this is a messy, very, very challenging environment to work in. It's a new position. People don't know what to make of it. So I'm happy to answer any questions about my experience in that position. So one of the big challenges I've faced, actually, and it's a small one, is the notional timeline associated with this project. Don't worry about the words. There's going to be a lot of slides and a lot of words, but they're really not as important as understanding that this project is really geared towards a 9-month completion. So you do these 2 major phases. The first phase is just a really rough diagnostic. It's called a preliminary resilience assessment. It's a scan of what are we doing well, what are we doing wrong, what are the gaps, where do we need to increase our understanding. And then you take that sort of finger pointing in 4 or 5 major areas to prioritize them, of course, and then start building out a strategy based on those. This is all evolving. For a city like Boulder that has a lot of high capacity, has undergone an event, done a lot of assessments already, having a really fuzzy, soft process like this has been a really tough sell. I like to say that process is outcome in the case of resilience. You're bringing people along, you're educating them on a new way of thinking about things, you're trying to make new connections, you still have to get them to the table to start with. And there has been a lot of curiosity that gets people to the table once. If the process isn't rigorous or interesting to them, they may not come back the second time. We've had a lot of that. So this is what our phase 1 looked like. We did a data inventory, actions assessment, what are we doing in the city. This is both formal and informal activity related to resilience. Again, we take the view that resilience is well beyond the natural systems and infrastructure systems, but social, economic issues, a whole host of other things. And then we did a series of community engagements. Another challenge in the Boulder context is probably unique, as far as I understand it from the network right now, is that given the level of community engagement around a couple of other topics, including the comprehensive plan and our unified housing strategy, there was not a lot of appetite to engage in a completely new conversation around resilience. And on one level, that I actually agree with that. I think it's a very confusing topic. It's a long road to bring everybody along. So the idea was to bring that sort of like secret, special resilience lens to each one of those conversations, and that hasn't worked out as well as you might hope. I think we'll get better at it. It's hard to know what the hook is in each one of those areas. So actually, one thing I want to call out here is the Growing Up Boulder. This was actually, I think, the most fun that I've had with community engagement. This was a at-risk youth program that already has a sort of a pipeline with the city and the school system, as well as the university. So it's a really wonderful partnership between these entities. And they were kind of hunting around for the next thing. They had already done some design planning around one of their neighborhoods, and this was just a blast. And the kids went and did a photo essay over the course of several months. And we didn't really use the term resilience as much as what's great in your community and what really sucks. What scares you, what's dangerous. It's just been fascinating. I wish I had a couple of photos here, but they're kind of finalizing it right now. One of the things, of course, we did was a risk profile. There's no real surprises here. There's not the zombie apocalypse or alien invasion. So these are risks that people are aware of. What happens in Boulder, of course, drought, floods, pandemic, wildfire, most of these are associated with climate change in one fashion or another. But they're also highly connected, right? Where do you start your analysis? Is it with changing climate? Maybe. Is it with pest infestation that leads to higher fire risk, leads to higher flood risk? Where do you start the analysis and start pulling on the thread? And sometimes it doesn't really matter. Really knowing that the complexity exists might be enough. But actually, you can't really tell here. I should call it out. One of the things that's really interesting in this is the homelessness connection to our wildfire risk. Right? So Boulder, as a wonderful place to live, attracts a fair number of transients who enjoy the new legalized marijuana in our public parks. But in in the evening, they often move into the mountains and camp during the summer. And these are people who are just largely off the social grid. We don't, they're not bad people, but they're doing their own thing. They're not really tuned into risk messaging. It's not really their primary concern. They start fires to keep warm at night. And so it's our mountain communities who have this informal network of keeping track of these folks and making sure that the fires are out in the evening and those sort of things. It's really fascinating, but it's a huge fire risk. It's only really a matter of time. So those of you who were here yesterday or the last couple of days have seen the oculus of resilience. And Arietta showed the most important level of it, that sort of inner ring. And Brian was kind enough to stop at the second ring, but they have gone ahead and created a third. And isn't it lovely? It's a lot, right? And so the beauty of this framework is that it does really check a lot of boxes, right? It's a wonderful thing from my background, primarily in climate risk. I'm just really not attuned, I use this to sort of check my corners, right? The mental health components, the food security components. It's wonderful for that. It is not a good planning tool. It's way too comprehensive. It doesn't really provide any sort of guidance on prioritization. If you look up, if you look up here and you can't read it because it's too small, meets basic needs. So one of these is water, and one of these is food, right? Okay, I mean, of the 50. So there's no sense of interconnectedness here, and so it's not a great planning tool. But I do want to bring that up to give you a sense that we are really looking holistically. Our resilience perceptions exercise was a community-based web survey. It's the absolute worst thing you can do in terms of methodology and rigor. And in a community that's driven by data, this is only a very limited use. But again, the PRA, you really have to embrace this. It's just a snapshot in time. It's a heartbeat. And so these are useful. And so the three main areas where the community perceives us to be in the weakest position is our leadership and effective management. So Boulder really prides itself on responsive governance. This is a real crisis right now, and this isn't just from public perceptions, of course. You see this in the newspaper on a daily basis almost. So it's not just one thing. We sort of cross-hatch it. We did a series of expert workshops. That's me, and those were sort of validated by the experts as well. I'm not going to read through these. I got a couple of very wordy slides, but this just really kind of reinforces some of those things. One of the things that the big takeaway here, number 4, the resilience strategy should support ongoing city actions. Right? So there's absolutely no interest, none, in a new strategy document that sits by itself and is not integrated into what's going on. So I'll give you the preview here that our resilience strategy, having not been written, or perhaps never will be, is to actually integrate resilience into all the existing capital improvement budgeting programs. We have an existing sustainability framework by which most of the city's operations are measured against, and we will be integrating resilience principles into that existing framework because it works for us. I mean, it's part of the community ethos, and we think that we can do that merging, make it more of a community framework rather than a sustainability or resilience framework, and it just will embody those principles. So housing affordability is also the dominant issue. So I wanted to come back to this for one quick second. This is the commitment from 100 Resilient Cities to the city. Funding to hire a chief resilience officer. I should note that it doesn't come with an additional penny beyond that. So everything else comes in from the city. Strangely, and it's it's a little bit of a catch-22. I think Boulder might be unique in the network this way as well, because we feel like we're doing so much in resilience already. the interest in adding an additional funding line has been pretty minimal. So a lot of my support comes from our efforts to expand the city's effort into the county and neighboring municipalities. So actually the staff person that they're hiring through the county will be to support my position in the city. I think that's the first time that's ever happened in Colorado. So developing a resilience strategy, our strategy won't be a document, we're not exactly sure what that'll look like. Platform of services, we're really getting into the fun part right now. In fact, we're starting to identify these areas, which I'll go into in just a really quick moment. But this is where you marry that technical expertise from some of the people in this room, in fact, to solving specific problems or like taking a deeper dive into some of those problems. And then my favorite part is actually membership in the 100 Resilience City Network, and just the quality of the peer network has been fantastic, and the lessons we're learning. We just heard a little bit about what's going on in the Bay Area, and it just gets you so fired up. I really want the same type too.
I know, it's cool.
Oops. So focus areas, because we haven't covered this yet, is these are really, again, sort of the further understanding of an analysis, analyze how some of the shocks and stresses might interact. We're actually not doing as much of this particular one because of the complexity of those interrelationships. It almost doesn't behoove us to try and quantify those. It's really asymmetric risk, and so what we look at then are sort of policy or capacity solutions to them. Integrate and prioritize existing efforts, which is really going to be the heart of our strategy, and then focus on specific part of the shock or stress. And so one of the things, given the issue of housing affordability and regional transportation, when you do the actions assessment, that helps you prioritize, where we should be putting our effort. And while that is, without question, the biggest issue in our community right now, there's a lot of focus already on that. So that could very easily be one of our focus areas, but it's kind of a diminished return in terms of other areas where we're going to put some focus. So very wordy slides. I took these just directly from a presentation I gave to City Council a couple weeks ago, trying to get their feedback. There are actually 7. I only put 4 up here. Resilient recovery, we're trying to learn some of the lessons, and we want to institutionalize those. The groundwater issue, it's a real question of like, what can you even do with that? Institutional response, one of the things, I think, from a formal emergency response perspective, I think across all metrics, we did very, very well. The performance was excellent. The city government's performance was probably less excellent, and we're trying to assess where those weaknesses were. And it's a small city, and what we're looking at is maybe a really complex program of where everybody has a secondary and tertiary responsibility during crises. So for instance, my position might move from sort of this obviously strategic planning phase into more of a PIO, public information officer, or maybe I'm trained also in using a forklift or heavy loader, just in case. Again, small community, you need to have those capacities. And I think that's the sort of stuff that people start getting fired up about. Actually, so this is actually about integration into the policy framework, comprehensive plan. We're doing that right now. So in the broad conception from the Rockefeller end of things, they would want you to go through these 2 or 3 steps sequentially. This doesn't really work in reality, of course. Right now, we're redoing our comprehensive plan. This is a once-in-a-5-year opportunity. And so to let this one sail by because we're going through this sort of stylized process doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're really focusing a lot of attention on the sustainability framework and comprehensive plan integration. Similarly, and not to diminish it at all, is the Human Services Master Plan. That's really hits on those social vulnerability issues that in some respects all too often in Boulder are forgotten. Climate, wealth, and security, it's not a mistake that these are blank. We're figuring it out. This is all a work in progress, all very draft. This is, rather than saying, our transition to a renewable energy system, we're really thinking about trying to take it one step further, right? If you're going to transition your entire energy system, your distribution and storage system, how can people who have not had a piece of the pie in the past now all of a sudden think about using their home asset as a wealth generator in ways that haven't been used before? Understanding changing risk, we're going to do an infrastructure impact analysis. We're going to create a climate toolkit for decision support within the government. This is a problem across communities worldwide, actually, where you just don't have that technical expertise within the city government to know how to interpret climate information. So you're often hiring consultants, maybe some even in the room here, to help do these impact assessments. But what happens is you don't know what projections are using, or what assumptions and what uncertainties are then inherently embedded in those. And so different divisions doing different projects, we use different climate scenarios, and really they're not comparable, right? We're trying to find a unified future. And there are obviously some risks to that. There introduces some uncertainty, but for whatever reason, people feel like climate scenarios have to tell the future, whereas economic models don't. And so this would be something very similar to that. And that's just tip of the iceberg, but I'm happy to take questions when we get through it.
Right.